Bikie gang member will stand trial over the execution of fruiterer Paul Virgona. He was shot dead in his van as he drove to work on EastLink, but why he was targeted remains a mystery.
In the early hours of the 9th of November 2019, a turning point occurred in the lives of many people in Melbourne, Australia. At 2:20 AM, amidst the darkness of the EastLink motorway near the Mullum tunnel in Donvale, the deafening sound of 11 gunshots shattered the silence. Inside a Volkswagen van, Paul Virgona, a respected fruiterer, husband and father, was gunned down in a hail of bullets. He had no chance to defend himself. He didn't even know his life was in danger. At that hour, while many were still asleep, Paul was making his usual journey to the Epping Market to begin his working day. It was a routine he knew inside out. Wake up early, prepare for the day, and work hard to support his family. But that day, someone was following him. Two men, hidden in the shadows of the early morning, had him in their sights. They had been waiting outside his home in Croydon for more than 2 hours. They were stalking him not for who he was, but for who they believed he was. The killers, Josh Ryder and Aaron Ong, members of the feared Mongols motorcycle club, were not after Paul. All evidence suggests they mistook him for his neighbour, a member of rival gang the Finks, in the midst of a bloody turf war between criminal gangs. When Paul started his ute in the early hours of that morning, he had no idea he was already a marked man. Ryder and Ong were following him in a stolen Mercedes. They had only driven a few kilometres along the motorway when the attackers suddenly closed in at full speed. At that moment, from the passenger seat, Josh Ryder pulled out a semi-automatic pistol and opened fire. 11 bullets struck the driver's side. 7 of them pierced Paul's body, causing him to lose control of the vehicle, which veered off and came to a stop in the left-hand lane. The scene was chilling, the engine still roaring, Paul's mobile phone resting on his lap, and his life already gone. The brutality of the crime sent shockwaves through the entire community. The killers wasted no time in putting their escape plan into motion. At 2:40 AM, the Mercedes used in the attack was found ablaze in a paddock in Murrulbach, directly in view of CCTV cameras. It was an obvious attempt to destroy evidence, but the cameras had also captured their movements, and that would prove to be a key piece in the investigation. Less than an hour later, at 3:30 AM, another part of the puzzle surfaced. A Volkswagen Amarok ute, also reported stolen, was found abandoned on Mountain Highway Bayswater. Police arrived swiftly at the scene and began a foot pursuit of 2 suspects. Though they were not apprehended at that time, the scene yielded a revealing clue: a Nike jumper apparently dropped by one of the men during the chase. That seemingly insignificant detail would become crucial evidence months later. On the 9th of January, 2 months after the murder, police released an image of the Nike jumper that had been found. That same day, Luca, Paul's 17-year-old son, made a desperate appeal to the public. "My father was an innocent and respected man," he said through tears, standing alongside his mother, Antonietta. The pain was obvious, the injustice unbearable, the pressure mounted. He was an innocent man, a hard worker. He didn't deserve this. I want someone to speak up. Someone knows something. Say it. His mother, Antonietta, stood beside him, visibly distraught. The family's grief was immense, and their indignation even greater. In the courtroom, Antonietta Virgona spoke to the press, holding back tears. "Paul was an incredible person, a devoted father, a model husband. We will miss him every single day of our lives." Meanwhile, Judge Beale was unequivocal. "The loss is immeasurable. The suffering is beyond words. This was a cowardly crime. Paul Virgona was innocent." As the sentences were handed down, Ong and Ryder showed little emotion. Ong, in a move that sparked outrage, patted Ryder on the back as they were both escorted out of the courtroom. Paul's story was not that of a criminal, far from it. He was a hard-working man, entirely dedicated to his family, completely detached from the violent world of organised crime. That is precisely why his murder caused such shock. How could a family man end up gunned down in a mafia-style execution? The answer was as tragic as it was absurd. All signs point to a case of mistaken identity. On the 22nd of January, the investigation took a decisive turn. Following simultaneous raids, Josh Ryder, aged 29, and Aaron Ong, aged 35 at the time, were arrested and formally charged with the murder of Paul Virgona. Both were active members of the Mongols motorcycle club. The Mongols MC was founded in 1969 in Montebello, California, United States. It was originally created by military veterans and Latino bikers who had been rejected by the Hells Angels, as the latter did not accept non-white members at the time. The Mongols adopted a rebellious and violent image, establishing a strong presence in the world of organised crime, including drug trafficking, arms dealing, and extortion. The Mongols' international expansion gained momentum during the 2000s, and they reached Australia in 2011. Their entry was made possible through a strategic merger with the Australian club FinCrime, a group also notorious for its criminal history. After a series of internal conflicts, many FinCrime members defected and aligned themselves with the Mongols, adopting their name, emblem, and organisational structure. This move was a key strategic decision for the Mongols, as they did not arrive from scratch, but rather inherited an already established network in key cities such as Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane and Perth, enabling them to grow rapidly. Police already suspected that the crime was linked to an escalating conflict between this gang and their rivals, the FinCrime. However, the court barred the jury from learning about the defendants' pasts or their connections to the gang war. For legal reasons, Ong was presented simply as someone associated with a motorcycle club. No Mongols insignia was allowed to be shown, nor was the gang conflict permitted to be mentioned. Despite these restrictions, the circumstantial evidence was compelling. The route taken by the stolen vehicles, CCTV footage showing their departure from the Mongols clubhouse in Port Melbourne, and the Jersey evidence clearly linked Ong and Ryder to the murder. On the eve of the trial, Ryder surprised everyone by pleading guilty, a decision that was not shared with the jury. Ong, by contrast, maintained his innocence, but the verdict was clear: guilty of the murder of Paul Virgona. Throughout the trial, Aaron Ong continued to assert his innocence. To the jury, he appeared merely as a man associated with a motorcycle club, without any mention that he was a fully patched member of the feared Mongols. By court order, all direct references to his membership in the criminal gang were omitted, and the media covering the trial were forbidden from referring to the club as a gang. Nor was it permitted to reveal that the murder could have been connected to a violent turf war between the Mongols and the FinCrime. All of this was concealed from the jury, who were left to deliver their verdict without knowing the true context that drove the crime. In 2023, sentencing was finally delivered. Aaron Ong was sentenced to 37 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 24.5 years. Josh Ryder received a 30-year sentence, with eligibility for release after 21 years. The Supreme Court in Melbourne was packed that day. Family members and friends of both the victim and the accused were in attendance. Many wiped away tears as Justice Christopher Beale spoke the following words: "An innocent man's life was cut short. His loss is immeasurable. The suffering you have endured and continue to endure is terrible." Antonietta Virgona, Paul's widow, spoke to the press as she left the courtroom. With a trembling voice, she thanked the police and prosecutors for their tireless efforts. "We feel relieved by the outcome and that it's now behind us. Paul was an incredible person, a loyal, hard-working man. He didn't deserve this. We will miss him every single day of our lives." But outside the courtroom, the story was very different. For months, police had been investigating shootings between rival gangs. The conflict between the Mongols and the FinCrime had dangerously escalated, leaving a trail of armed attacks on the streets of Melbourne. Amidst that violent atmosphere, detectives believed Ong and Ryder were seeking to settle scores and targeted the wrong person. Paul Virgona was not a gang member. He had no criminal record and no enemies. His only fault was living near someone who was involved with the FinCrime. In the eyes of his killers, that proximity was enough to mark him as a target. Justice Christopher Beale described the crime as a meticulously planned execution. Ong and Ryder travelled in convoy using 2 stolen vehicles, a Mercedes and a Volkswagen Amarok. On the night before the crime, they were seen coming and going from the Mongols clubhouse in Port Melbourne, with CCTV cameras capturing their movements. However, due to court restrictions, all logos, flags and insignias of the Mongols were blurred or removed in the footage shown to the jury. After finalising their preparations, the two men drove through the suburbs to Muralbark, where they left the Amarok. Then, in the Mercedes, they headed to Virgona's house and waited patiently for nearly 2 hours. At 2:20 in the morning, when Paul left his home bound for the Epping Market to begin his workday as a greengrocer, he was followed by his killers. 12 minutes later, on the EastLink motorway near the Mullum Tunnel, the Mercedes pulled up alongside Paul's van. From the window, Ryder drew a semi-automatic pistol and fired 11 shots, striking Paul at least 7 times. The vehicle veered out of control and came to a stop in the right-hand lane. Inside the van, the engine was still running. Paul was dead. His mobile phone rested on his lap. Ong and Ryder's escape was as swift as it was violent. At 2:40 AM, just 20 minutes after the murder, they set the Mercedes alight in a vacant lot in Muralbark. Nearby security cameras captured the flames consuming the vehicle. An hour later, the stolen Volkswagen Amarok was found abandoned in the middle of a road in Bayswater. Police arrived shortly after, but the suspects had fled on foot. It was there that investigators discovered a key piece of evidence: a Nike jumper, a distinctive hooded sweatshirt. Detectives collected it as evidence and, months later, on the 8th of January, released an image of the garment appealing for public assistance. They suspected it had been dropped by one of the killers during the escape. The reasons behind Paul Virgona's murder were as absurd as they were devastating. Police and prosecutors agreed it was a case of mistaken identity. Paul had been confused with one of his neighbours, allegedly a member of the Finks, a gang at odds with the Mongols. His only link to that conflict was his postcode. Neither Paul nor his family had any ties to gangs or criminal activity. His life revolved around work, family and dedication. He was a man who rose early to supply markets with fresh fruit, who spent weekends with his wife and son, and who could never have imagined his life would end in such a violent way. The case of Paul Virgona became a symbol of the price one can pay for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or simply for having the wrong neighbour. A senseless death that left a family shattered and an entire city in shock. This brings us to the end of the case. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. As always, if you've enjoyed this video and want more stories from the Australian underworld, please consider subscribing and liking this video. It really helps me out and helps the channel grow. Till next time, take care.